So hello everyone and welcome to this BCS Neurodiverse IT talk on neurodiversity and entrepreneurship. We're very lucky to have David Lane joining us, who is I'll let you introduce yourself, Dave, because it's going to be easier than me doing the introduction. But what we're going to be talking about today is tech entrepreneurship a good path for you, and all of the different permutations. And we're going to be sharing all of the experience that Dave has to share, because he has a lot of it too. So that's basically it. So I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about how you came to where you are now.
Thank you very much, Matthew. It's lovely to be here. Thanks very much for joining us. So I, back in 2006, started working for myself. I started a IT support company, and I've now been in business for 17 years or something, 18 years, a long time anyway. So today I want to share with you what I've been doing, how work's changed really. Obviously post-COVID, that's had a big dramatic effect on everyone's work. And we kind of break things down into kind of three sections today. So we're going to talk about like an overview of self-employment, how does it work, what kind of structures exist. Then we're going to talk about how that impacts neurodiverse people. And finally, we're going to talk about some of the things you need to do to make it sustainable for you. So that's kind of the kind of big picture. And then Matthew, hopefully he's going to be looking at the comments and interacting with some questions, ideas, thoughts, etc.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll keep an eye out. If you've got any questions during the talk, please do share them in the comments. And I'll bring them in if they're appropriate, or else we'll have a section to discuss at the end of each. We'll have a period to discuss at the end of each section, and then we'll have some time for more general discussion at the end, depending on how that goes. Just for anyone else to share anything that doesn't fit. Thank you all very much for sharing your introductions and your experience. I can see that we have quite a range of different experience in the chat. And what we'd really hope out of today's conversation is that we're going to help give you an idea of really, what it is to be an entrepreneur, how that shows up, how that can be different for neurodivergent people, both make it better, easier sometimes, or harder, more difficult. And finally, how can you do that sustainably? How can you look after yourself and the business and make it a lasting thing that's going to stick? So, shall we begin with, what actually do we mean by being an entrepreneur? How does that start? What is that?
Well, I think that there's several different ways you can think about it, because you've got people that are self-employed, that work for themselves. Certainly in the UK, there's lots of legal structures you can do around different types of businesses, which we're not going to go into too much. But you can be self-employed. You can be one of those digital nomads now. You could be running a mini business or a micro business, or creating lots of businesses with multiple teams of people, or you could be a member of a team that starts a bigger company or join a larger organization as a director of some sort. So there's all sorts of different ways you can become this kind of entrepreneurial thing that aren't necessarily right for everyone. So I think a lot of the people here are probably going to be thinking about that kind of solo entrepreneur path. That's kind of my impression, looking at some of the comments briefly. So I think we'll kind of focus on that. But there's no like right or wrong answer here. It's really a question of what do you want to do. Now, when I started back in 2006, long time ago, there wasn't things that you could use to kind of find work individually. It was much harder. But more and more people now are on that self-employment journey, or certainly otherwise working in small teams. And most people work for small organizations. I think that's kind of most businesses are quite small, sort of under 3 people, and you don't need to create a mega corporation if you're going to be an entrepreneur. You don't need to necessarily create one of these funded startups. That is an option. If people want to go down that route, you can either do self-funded, or you can go out and look for funding. It is a very complicated thing to do. And really for that, you want a collaborative team to work with. And we'll talk more about that later. But they're the kind of broad areas. So you can either have a small team, just you, or a bigger team that's growing. And there's no right or wrong answer. Yeah.
Super, thank you. And when you started out, when you were starting out, what models did you try? What models did you
Ah,
consider? And
well,
where did you end up being? Where did you feel was right for you in the end?
as I said, I think at the time there wasn't really these micro businesses didn't really exist at the time. There wasn't really the facility to do that. So I very quickly grew a team. My idea was that I was sick of working for the idiot boss. Uh, but then I realized eventually that now I'm the idiot boss. So yeah, and that's the way it goes. I think people's expectation is by getting rid of their boss, they're going to make their life easier. And there are strengths and weaknesses to that. We'll talk about those. But yeah, to start with, I pretty quickly started growing my team, and I learned very quickly that hiring people is very challenging. You have to work through a few different people to find the right ones. It's like a panning for gold, really. Once you have really good people, it's brilliant. So I always try and look for people that I think for whatever the role is I'm looking for are better than me. But it's a lot of work to recruit people. It's not easy. And one thing a lot of startups make the mistake of is employing friends and family. I'd discourage you from doing that. That said, I work for a lot of, I run a managed IT services company mostly. I do IT consultancy for lots of other managed service providers as well. But the main kind of mainstay of a lot of those companies is they are family businesses. So they might have 5 or 6 people in the family, mums, children, whatever, that are all working together. And we'll talk a little bit later about how you can structure the business so that can work. But finding good people is definitely a challenge. So it's something that nowadays I think you can do. And Matthew, we talked about this previously. It's a lot easier to do things on your own without having that big team behind you. And that wasn't the case in the past. But there are some skills you definitely want to hire in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as we see more tools coming out for people, it's more viable to run a business of one person and not spend your entire life just doing admin and now we can automate more. So there are some advantages to that. Plus, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, in 2006 you couldn't have a single person company either. So if you wanted to be
No,
a
you had
limited
to
company, I think
you
you
had to
had to
have
have at least
a
2 people.
secretary at the
Yeah.
very least. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that the things have changed so much, and certainly nowadays there's so much more information. It's so much easier to kind of get going. But that there are still the same barriers to entries in terms of skill sets. Those haven't really changed. It's if you've been working in the corporate world for a long time to start your own business, there's a lot of things you're going to have to learn. A
And
lot of things.
so I think that leads us very neatly to, like, what do you actually need to cover? We talk about running a business. Like, what are the high level aspects that you need to make sure you've got a handle on to be able to say you are a business, to say you're running a business?
So I will be sharing my notes on this, but essentially these areas are sales, marketing, finance, leadership, technical, and organizational skills. Let's go through each of those. That was way too fast. So starting with sales, you absolutely have to have a sales function in your business or it will not work. You have to be able to find people that will buy your thing, and you have to be able to persuade them to buy it for a price that's affordable for you to. And that's another thing that a lot of people think, well, I've been working and I've been earning X amount per hour. If I start my own job, I can undercut people and just charge a little bit more than that maybe. But you mentioned there about admin. Admin is a huge cost for running any business, however, no matter how small. So you need to factor in the costs for all of these different areas. So when you're growing your business, first thing to do, get somebody that's in charge of sales, either you or somebody else that you employ, to make sure that stuff is coming in, because you need to build this thing called the sales funnel, where you have your leads and opportunities and you work down through, and then at the bottom you have your sales, and then hopefully people pay you. And it does take time to build these things up, whether you do it yourself, whether you employ people. It's not an instant thing. You can't spin up a business tomorrow and instantly, unless you've got lots of money behind you, instantly have a team. So you need sales, and then to deliver into sales, you need your funnel. And the first area of that is marketing. So you're going to need a way of promoting what it is that you do. And I'm always a very big fan nowadays of really niching down. Niching is a really important thing in businesses. Don't be a plumber, be a specialist in valent boilers in sun. It's much easier now with the internet. People can find you. That wasn't the case 10, 20, 30 years ago. Do you remember the yellow pages? So yeah, so if you wanted to run a business, you'd advertise in the yellow pages and then hope people will ring you. But now we've got social media marketing. There's all sorts of things you can do to reach out to people. You can put flyers through people's doors. You can do door knocking. There's a million and one different things you can advertise online. You can create a whole social media channel, and that's a big time sink because most marketing doesn't do anything. And that's a very frustrating exercise. I went to a presentation by the guy that came up with the it's a very, very old thing, the Marlboro cigarettes, Marlboro Man, and it was a very, very successful advert. But for the first year, it didn't do anything at all. No one was interested. So marketing is a long haul effort that constantly needs to go into any business. So again, you need to either learn about marketing or employ someone to do it. And when I'm saying employ someone to do it, I'm saying you should spend thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds on this. What you want to do instead is try and work out what your product or service is looking like and try to get it to the point where the marketing money you're spending has some result as quickly as possible. And companies like Facebook, Google, whatever, are very good at getting you to spend money on advertising that doesn't deliver. So some little expertise there is very important. Then we have finance. Now, finance is always an interesting problem, I think, especially for ADHD people. Something that I've always struggled with my business, and I've always had a bookkeeper from day one and an accountant. And I absolutely strongly 100% say you need to get, we talked about this before anyways, Matthew, as well. You absolutely have to have somebody to manage the financial and legal aspects of your business. And again, that shouldn't be that expensive. Obviously, don't pick somebody that's like £20 a year. Your realistic budget sort of £600 to £1,500 a year for an accountant, and they should be able to do some of your bookkeeping and keep your accounts straight. You obviously need a separate business bank account. Now, I mentioned earlier you can have different types of legal entities. If you create a limited company that has its own bank accounts, if you're self-employed and you don't have a limited company, in the UK at least, then you just need a separate bank account to keep track of it. Because obviously one of the biggest things, your biggest expenses is going to be taxation. So you need to keep on top of this stuff before it becomes a problem. And it's very easy. The HMRC are very generous. They give you a year and a half to pay bills, but then you need to have the money ready to pay. So don't lose sight of that. Don't be one of these people that starts a business and then gets into financial difficulties of not paying their tax. You've got to put the money aside each month. I recommend, there's a few different things, but the envelope system is something called Profit First you can look into. It's a really good system for managing your finances and getting your business on the right track from day one, where you have different accounts essentially for different types of money. Okay, then you have the technical side of your business. So that's probably where a lot of people will come into this idea of being self-employed or running a business. So you've got technical skills, you've maybe been to university, you've done these qualifications, you've got the studying that you've done, maybe you've worked for a company for a while and you've got your technical knowledge to get going. Now, the technical knowledge is probably only a third of what you need to do to run a business. And that's big problem for a lot of people that start working for themselves, because they've got the technical knowledge, they think they'll be able to do what they're doing at the moment, but they've forgotten about the sales and the marketing and the finance and all the admin that goes behind that. And it can become very stressful very quickly. So I recommend that everybody thinks about learning about a little bit about all the other aspects of the business that they're going to need to understand. And you don't need to get an MBA to Masters of Business Administration to do this. You just have to have a good overview of what you're going to need to do in each of those areas. Now, one of the things that a lot of people do when they first start their business is create a business plan. And that can be really helpful, but it can also take up a lot of time as you try and define what it is that you're going to do, how you're going to market it, etc. I recommend that you look at something called a minimum viable product. So you come up with something you think people might be interested in. and try and find people that you know that you can reach and see if they're interested in buying it at a price that makes sense. Okay, they're the main areas, but the big area I think for neurodiverse people, and certainly when I started running my business, was the organizational skills. So now Matthew and I, when we were talking about what we were going to talk about today, really, I think that was kind of the big area. So I haven't been looking through all these questions, but are there relevant things that people have asked Matthew about this?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of questions about actually just the background from people talking about where they are, where, like some people who work as independent contractors, some people currently unemployed, thinking about whether they should go into tech entrepreneurship. Some support for what you said around and using the recommending Zero as a platform.
Yeah.
Anyone who's not reading the chat, that's Zero with an X. Who I use, they're the platform I use as well, but not to endorse them specifically. It just, as long as you've got an accountancy thing that works for you and connects with all of your, connects with your bank account, so you're not doing it manually, all of that stuff. That's the
Yeah,
right
I
thing.
recommend either Zero or QuickBooks, and
Yeah.
then I use a program called Dex. I put this in the notes for the meeting anyway. It's really, really good for pulling invoices out, so we're not like either printing them off. I know it's 2024, or losing them in a mire of emails, so they automatically either get pulled through from my emails, get straight into Zero in my case, or QuickBooks.
Yeah.
Not Sage, but well, not this thing.
And I
Yeah,
think
you mentioned there about contractors. So I should point out that obviously there are a lot of self-employed people that are contracting. You've got to be quite careful. There's laws in the UK, I think it was IR 35, around whether you're an employee or a contractor. So you've got to be very careful how you go about doing that. You can work with an umbrella company that will help you do that if that's something you want to do. And the most important thing, if you're in the contracting world, is you need to be putting money aside each month, because you might be out of work for 6, 12, 18 months, because you're dependent on the economy, which goes up and down all the time. I've been through many cycles now of recessions and etc. So you've got to put money aside if you're out of work for a while. If you're running a business where people pay you each month, that's less of an issue than it is if you're a contractor. And again, with contracting, you've got to put your tax money aside, because it takes a while for it to come through. I recommend using an umbrella company, and they'll help you sort that out. Make sure you're working within the law. There are lots of them out there.
Thank you. And David in the chat has also mentioned, which I think is a really useful kind of practical stuff, and makes me think, what you actually need to start trading. He said very basic terms and conditions of sale. I would also add by law a privacy notice, so that if this is if you're a company anyway, so that you've got all of that kind of written up, and it doesn't need to be complicated. It's really just very so it's there and it's very simple. And so you could just use that. Yep. Oh yes, and registration with the ICO, which is the other thing.
So some company formation organizations, they charge quite a lot of money for it, will help you through this process, or your accountant can, or there's a list online of all the things you need to do.
Yep.
With interesting in the UK, you don't actually have to do anything with HMRC to start with, but you do have to, within the year, first tax year, register, tell them you're self-employed, or it's quite odd. So with a limited company, I own the limited company and am employed by it as well.
This is the strange thing, like limited. I don't want to get too much into it, but limited companies are the way that a lot of us choose to work for multiple reasons. It's a bit like being an employee, but also being employed to run the company. That's kind of the best way to think about, I think, is the way that I kind of. But yeah, does anyone have any more questions or anything before we move on? Because I'd really like to look at how neurodiversity shows up in all of this. So does anyone have any questions before we move on that you'd like to share in the chat, or raise your hand, use the raise hand feature if you would like to ask a question through voice instead. It's not telling me anyone's typing, but then I'm not sure it does at the moment. I will assume that we're all good for the time being, and move on now. So yeah, so I think what I'd really like to explore with you, Dave, is what difference being neurodivergent really makes in all of this. How can it show up? And perhaps the first thing that came up for me, you've talked about employing other people. You're at the very least going to be working closely with other people, if not directly employing them. So you're actually going to be doing quite a lot of management type stuff. How for you did that feel? Was that a challenge for you? How did you cope with, like, did you I know some people enjoy it. Like, how did that go for you?
Yeah, I think to start with, it's very difficult to manage a. Well, now I have a virtual and hybrid team is even more complicated, and a lot of even traditional managers are struggling with managing people. Yeah, I think it is a big source of frustration. There's no doubt about it. You've got to be both empathetic and quite strict with people. I think to start with, I was a bit too laissez-faire in my management style. So different people have kind of different management styles, can be very draconian, authoritarian, laissez-faire. There's various other different styles. So you can read all about your management skills. I think it's something you're going to have to put quite a bit of time into. And I guess the big problem is that, say you're doing something where you think you're mostly going to be working on your own, you're going to pretty soon discover there's things that you need to have managed for you that you don't have the skills to do. And those people you're going to have to manage to some extent. If you employ somebody that's already doing the job, that's an expert, either as a contractor or as an employee, that's easier, but more expensive. If you're going to train somebody up, they're going to make lots of mistakes. And mistakes are learning opportunities, and we want to be making mistakes in a controlled, managed way. So that's really difficult to watch somebody make a mistake in order to let them learn. Now, I have young children, so it's like the best analogy really is that you're never going to teach a child to walk if you carry them everywhere. So and with your experience as an entrepreneur, you're going to have to develop your skills around managing leadership. There's no doubt about it, and that's going to come with time. If you've worked in a big corporate environment, you'll have human resources, you've had payroll, you've all these other departments to help support you. You're not going to have any of that. So you've got to be very careful. The employment law is very strict in the UK in terms of what you can and can't do and say, both from hiring people through to firing people. You do need to make sure, like, again, you don't need to spend a fortune on it, but you do need to understand the major tenets of the law around discrimination and rules around holidays, etc., etc. And if you employ people, you're also going to have to pay their tax.
Yes, so that's another reason to engage with an accountant.
Absolutely,
yes, absolutely.
That is extreme. That is extremely complicated. PAYE.
Yeah.
It's. I wouldn't pretend to understand it that well. Most accounting stuff I'm pretty hot on, but yeah, PAYE is its own special. You need specialist software, etc. Yeah, that's definitely something I would outsource 100% if you decide you're going to employ people. Yeah, hiring and firing people is not fun. It takes a lot of time to hire them, and then firing them is a miserable experience. So, unless you're some kind of crazy narcissist that likes firing people, and you're not going to get it right all the time, unfortunately. I probably say I got about maybe 1 in 5 works out. Maybe it's very, very hard, and then people leave. People go can find to post more money, or they don't like you, or you don't like them, or in a small business you've got to work as a really tight team, so you've got to be giving people direction, which comes to the organizational stuff. That's often the big problem with neurodiverse individuals, certainly with the ADHD stuff. We'll talk more about the kind of emotional psychological stuff in a moment, but the organizational skills is very challenging because you are going to have to wear a lot of different hats, and that can be difficult. I use something called a default diary to try and help organize my time. What I do is each day, or each about every 3 hours, I have a different dedication of that time to something else. So I'm not just flitting between a million different tasks. Goal setting is really important, and learning about the time management techniques if you've not worked on those before. Now, time management is an interesting thing. I think if you're struggling with managing your time because you have time blindness, learning about time management isn't useful. You can spend a lot of time putting processes in place. I use a software called Todoist for organizing my tasks and goals. That's a really good starting point. There are lots of others. And over the next couple of years, we're going to see, and we'll talk about more about technology as well, digital brains coming in, this whole thing where the computer's going to be able to manage some of this stuff for you. But at the moment, it's about making a list and kind of working through these processes.
And I think that you raise an interesting point about self-management there as well. And, the fact that, like as you alluded to at the beginning, you are giving up one, you don't have a manager other than yourself. And you do need, and particularly if you have, a lot of ADHD is really positive for a lot of aspects of entrepreneurship. There's actually some research to suggest that some of the strengths that typically go with ADHD are really beneficial in entrepreneurship situations, but it does come with issues around kind of organization, structure. I think to add to that as well, one of the things I've noticed is we tend to work closely with and hire people who are quite a lot like us. If you're neurodivergent, you're actually likely to end up working with largely a neurodivergent team. And that will mean that you have certain blind spots and certain difficulties that maybe other teams don't. And it also means you have strengths and abilities that other teams don't. But so I think it's a really interesting challenge. And I think, Dave, is there anything you've learned about how you approach yourself and manage yourself that would be useful to share?
Yeah, before we get to managing myself, one thing I was thinking about, just what you were talking about there, if I'm saying hire a salesperson, great. Most salespeople are going to be a big clash to your technician role. Looking at like the notes here, most people coming from a technical background, they're going to be quite difficult to manage. So you need to be prepared to you need to have a process in place before you hire them. And this something that took me a long time to understand. And this kind of leads back to one of the skills you need to develop. If you're going to hire somebody, you need to know what it is you want them to do, and you need to have a process so you can delegate the tasks to them. If you don't understand the process, so if you say, I'm going to hire someone to do sales, you're going to have a hard time getting them to deliver anything of value, and it's going to be very difficult to manage them if you don't understand what it is they're supposed to be doing. And obviously, they're going to be the expert, they're going to know more than you. But if you don't understand the basics and you haven't given them enough of a framework to work within, it's going to be very hard for them to deliver. And then you failed. And I've certainly, some of my team in the past, I failed to manage them, which is painful. And then you have to let them go, and it costs money, time, it's a lot of energy. So my strong advice is find somebody that does the thing that you're going to hire, you're not going to employ, and ask them to help you create or pay them to help you even create a framework for that person. So it's not such a problem for accountancy, but certainly for sales and marketing, if you don't know about it, you're going to need somebody to guide you through that journey. Hiring an accountant, they'll be used to going through that process and taking you through the journey. My experience of hiring advanced technical people, and certainly anyone in the sales marketing arena, is that they need a lot more direction. That is to say, you need to be clear what the objectives are that you want them to do. You need to give them material information, because you don't want them to sell anything. You want to sell stuff that you can deliver as part of your product or service. Now, when I first started, I think the people I hired, maybe they were lacking in skills. There were skill gaps, and that's very difficult to recognize in your first business. Now, if I was to do it again now, it's much easier, and certainly because I go into hundreds and hundreds of businesses, it's very easy for me to see the skill gaps and the processes people have in place that aren't delivering, because you have to deliver on those sales, marketing, finance. A business will not work without all of those areas. And if one of them is missing or not delivering, that will impact the other areas quite dramatically. And part of the difficulty, and the thing that took me the most time to learn, is this is why I love doing the schedules in my diary, is you've got to spend time each week in each of those areas. It's no good spending time. The best example I can give you, certainly with the ADHD stuff, is building a lot of something but not finishing it. And that's a big problem for ADHD in particular, and probably for other neurodiverse people as well, in terms of, are you getting stuff finished? Because people always underestimate what they can get done in the long term and overestimate in the short term. And that's something you've got to always have in the back of your mind. It might take a week's work to achieve something, but over time, once you've got things going, adding a little bit each week makes a dramatic difference.
I think that approach of, building and not trying to do it all right now, like what's the smallest thing that's going to move it forward, and building on that is definitely the way. We've got a question from David in the chat who says, are there any difficulties with describing what you want a new person to do, for example marketing, if you don't know about marketing? How do you get the right balance?
Fantastically, now we have ChatGPT for doing a lot of the legwork for you. So you can ask it. It can be your marketing recruitment expert. You can give it a prompt and say, please be my recruitment expert for this person in marketing. What information do they need? The balance really is somebody can only market something if they understand what it is that you're looking for. So they need to know who your target audience is, what you're going to say to that audience roughly, and what avenues you want them to market to. Now they'll go off and do more, but if you haven't got the baseline, it's very difficult for someone to deliver. It's very difficult to market or sell something you don't know, you don't understand properly. People often talk about this in the past as like believing in the product, but actually that you have to understand enough about the thing you're selling. You don't have to be an expert, but if you don't understand enough about what the strengths are and the weaknesses are, it's very, very hard to get that message across correctly. And interestingly, techie people are also very bad at marketing, because I know this, it's so easy to talk about something technical and then watch people's eyes glaze over. It's like, yeah. Yeah, what you interrupted me earlier when we started talking about limited companies. It is that it's very easy to get caught up in the technicalities, and a marketing person will be talking a very different language to your customers, and that's where this clash. And this is very important that you have that conversation and they understand both in your words and in the customer's words what the thing is that you're selling. And often the words it's like a different language. Does that answer your question at all?
I think that was really helpful. I think the other thing I might add to that is, certainly, particularly when you're in a smaller team, it's less important to think about the best marketing person in kind of objective terms, and more important to think about the best fit marketing person for the situation, for the business. You know, someone that, if you're a technical business, if someone is less experienced at marketing in a general sense, but is somewhat technical and has a bit of an understanding and can bridge some of that gap for you, they might be a better fit for the work than finding someone who's like the greatest, shiniest marketing person, but has only ever worked in a big corporate selling, soft drinks, and doesn't understand what it is to work in a small business selling technical things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the mistake that a lot of people make is they try and employ like the kind of the 5-star top person to do everything, because they think that's what they need. But actually what you really need is somebody that's got a good understanding, that understands about small businesses, understands how to get things done. And now you've got Upwork, Fiverr, people per hour. You can break this job down into various components if you want. So if you want to do Facebook advertising, find a Facebook advertising specialist. Now, the way I do this, and this has been quite useful, so I will share this briefly, and that's not in my notes, I will add it, is to, you're not necessarily going to find the best person with the first person you try. So what I like to do is try somebody, just write a description of what you want, try somebody, see how they go, give them a very small task to do, that's certainly under an hour's work, preferably under half an hour's work. See how they get on. If you're happy with them, maybe give them more work. If you're not happy with them, try somebody else until you've got somebody that you're really happy with, and hopefully you can use them until you get to the point where you want to employ somebody full time, or at least half the time, because they're going to be too busy. And sometimes these people start off brilliant and then their work just declines. It's very frustrating. And that's a big thing now. Is when I started my business, those kind of things didn't exist really. So I would definitely make use of those skill set. And obviously, if you're employing somebody in India or the Philippines, there's a cultural difference, but it's a lot cheaper. But it's difficult sometimes to know if they're doing good work. So you've got to do a bit more management there. So it's not easy. But I'll share some stuff in my notes about my experience of trialing different people, and you won't have to go through a few people, even if they've got amazing reviews, unfortunately.
And I think one of the challenges I've come across with the neurodiversity type stuff is that knowing where my strengths are and where my interests are, because I've got, I've actually always liked the kind of marketing side of things. I like the storytelling. I like like that's never something I struggle with. But actual sales, I find much harder. So it's a strange, like, understanding how you relate to all of the different aspects of what's necessary to run the business, of that list of sales, marketing, finance, leadership, technical and organizational stuff. And like, where are you really strong and where are you relatively weak? And which aspects of that? And so you're looking for people that are close enough that you can work with, but also have fill in the gaps. It's kind of a balancing act, isn't it? But for me, a lot of successful recruitment, successful partnerships with other organizations as well, because there's another possibility. It's quite a lot of my work I get through partnerships where I've got this skill set, another organization's got a bunch of skills that they've got, and the two work nicely together. And so I don't need to buy it in permanently. I can just work with another organization on a kind of joint project. So there's so many different ways you can play with this, but really knowing where are you strong, where do you enjoy, where also that's the other side of it, like which bits are exciting for you and where don't you want. And the lovely thing about running your own business is you can design that. There isn't a right or wrong way to run a business.
Yeah,
Every business runs differently.
one of the things, Matthew, is that because you've not got your idiot boss anymore, and now you're the idiot boss, as I mentioned, you can decide to do what you want. If you want to work only in the afternoons, 3 days a week, you can do that. If you want to work all the hours of the day and night, you can do that as well. Good luck to you. But I recommend doing 35 hours a week at most. That's about the sweet spot. And there's plenty of studies that have found that. And when you start, it's very easy to just work, and you just burn through your energy. A couple of things I wanted to mention about hiring recruitment consultants, very expensive way of hiring people. I'd recommend for micro business and small business, that's probably not the way to go. Because yeah, there's a lot of expense needed. This idea of partnership and this idea of working with other people, there's a really important thing that you should definitely do at the beginning of your journey is find other people that are in the same position with similar kinds of businesses. Most of my work, it comes through other companies like mine. Not exactly the same, but like mine, because they know your business the best and they can refer you the best work because they know what you're really, really good at. And the stuff that you really enjoy, they go, look, I hate doing this. You're really good at it. Do that. So just earlier today, I was working on a project on a piece of software for a company in America. And he said, well, you know how to do this. You've done it before. I haven't. I could spend 2 days on it, or I can just pay you a few hours and it will be done. So don't consider competitors as kind of evil. Instead, consider them as possible business partners to help you grow. And maybe later on, you might want to work together in a more formal way. That's a possibility as well. And yeah, I think when it comes to all the different areas, I think it's important that you understand enough to make a decision. And that's really key. So when it comes to sales, marketing, finance, accounts, etc., if you don't know enough to make a decision, it's very, very difficult. That's all you need. So you need to have somebody you can ask the right questions till you're sure that you go, yes, I understand enough. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to spend weeks and weeks and months learning bookkeeping qualifications or accounting qualifications. but I would suggest over time you'll want to develop the skills around, maybe if you've got a proper business, a big business, you're going to need to understand enough about profit and loss and balance sheets for it to make sense. But when you first start, which is what, interestingly, if you do your master's in business administration, that's the first thing that they'll teach you, because they know that you need to know this to run a big proper business. If you're a sole entrepreneur, a lot of this stuff you can give to somebody else. But if you don't understand it at all, you can't be sure you're making the right decisions, because there's all these different areas need balance.
Absolutely. And again, I think, there's so much of this that's, you can approach it in different ways, but I think just to slightly wrap this up and maybe bring us into the last section as well, and is one of the things I found, and I think you were touching on, Dave, as well, is the most important things for running the business has been relationships with, clients, customers, collaborators, competitors in inverted commas. That, like you say, I completely agree. I think, we look at competition, for most of us as small businesses in particular, our competition isn't someone else getting the work. It's people not being aware that they can even solve the problem that you fix for them.
So the two bits of software you need when you first start a business is accountancy software and the CRM, a contact relationship management system. And again, all you've got in there to start with is your list of contacts. But if you can find something, there's lots of inexpensive solutions out there that you can start using, so you can track who you're communicating with. I find that really helpful. I get overwhelmed by I just recently cleared up all the contacts on my phone, because I don't really need 4,500 phone numbers on my phone. I don't think that's helping my sanity. So yeah, a CRM is really valuable, but you have to learn to use that tool as well.
And I think it's also a case that you can do relationships however the idea of like the traditional salesperson phoning people up. First of all, when I used to work as a sysadmin, I'm sure for any of you that have worked in anything like that, you'll have feelings about being phoned up randomly by salespeople, and they won't be good feelings. So like finding a way that works for you and works to stay in touch with your clients is really, really good. I use a mixture of mostly email, and actually LinkedIn works really well for me. The chat on LinkedIn works nicely. I can kind of keep up with people, but whatever happens, you can find whatever medium works for you, even if you don't really like phone calls, or you don't really like, that it's just about maintaining those relationships in the best way for you.
I would definitely suggest, if you're going to do social stuff, pick a platform.
Yep.
I've been doing quite a lot on YouTube. That's been really good. LinkedIn is good as well for my strategic IT stuff. Facebook's, like, most people have got a Facebook account, whether they use it or not is another matter. But traditional stuff works as well. Phone calls, letters. If you handwrite letters to people, they will read them.
That's definitely true. Yeah, doing the thing that other people are not, which as a neurodivergent people we're often quite good at.
Yeah.
Can be a really, really useful thing, because we do it your own weird way, and people might notice, and that's a good thing now.
But people have to know you exist. They have to like you, and they have to trust you to be able to deliver the thing that they want. That's super important. They have to know, like, and trust. If you haven't got those things in place, you're not going to sell anything, because it's impossible. And I think that's the thing, is it takes time. It takes time for people to understand what it is that you do, and for you to reach out and find those people. The kind of traditionally, people always said it's a couple of years' work for people to discover you. So if you've got a job at the moment that's like the thing you're going to be doing in your business, if you can, obviously you can't poach your existing customers probably, but if you can build relationships with people in that area, that can speed things on a lot. I find that by niching down nowadays, if you work in one particular sector, it's much easier to kind of find those people, find out where they hang out and go and meet them, or find them online. Whereas again, 20 years ago, this technology didn't exist. And I think that a big mistake that most people make is they don't narrow down enough what they do. That they're doing too broad. There's too broad things. Like you don't want to be a plumber. You want to be a valent boiler specialist in Sutton, or heat pump specialist in Sutton or whatever. The point is that you want to be the best person in the world at the thing that you do, and for it to be quite narrow in your marketing, because that way people can find you easily, because Google, all these algorithms will help people find you that are interested in your stuff. If you're just I don't know, electrician, a plumber, a computer programmer, it's very hard to differentiate yourself. So you really want to try and narrow that down. Obviously, there has to be a market for it, but people can find you if you are more specialist. And that's a big change in kind of business in general, is that you can be a lot more specialist and you'll make a lot more money by doing that.
Absolutely. I think that idea, and that does lead us, to this last section about making things sustainable. There's a couple of interesting comments and questions in the chat. I'd like to come back to those at the end rather than bring them in now, but I would like to come back to them. So thank you for sharing them. But that for me, that keeping focused, being not trying to do too much, not trying to spread yourself too thin, is one of the key ways to make sure that we can, what we're asking ourselves to do is manageable.
So one of the ideas I'd like you to take away is this idea of the recipe, the procedure. And it took me a long time to understand this, a long time to understand this. It took me a long time to understand about that idea of narrowing down your focus, of niching, and it being easier to market if you're really specialist. It took me even longer to learn about this idea of having a process and not doing stuff that's too oddball. If you have a defined process of the thing that you do, so people can replicate it, that means you can delegate that task to somebody else. Now, not all tasks, some tasks have a kind of artistic or skill element to them that you're not going to want to delegate. But for everything else, you want to be able to have a process that other people can copy. So the example is always McDonald's. So McDonald's, hugely successful, not because they make the best burgers, because they're a very, very process-driven organization. And they have a step-by-step process, so 17-year-old teenagers can flip burgers. And the process is very well written, and they spend a lot of time. And that's one of the things you have to do when you hire people, spend a lot of time showing them how to do the thing that you want. And developing those processes, if anyone's interested, I've got a lot of videos on YouTube about building a documentation culture, but developing those processes is really, really valuable and really, really helps you when you get to the point that you want to hire somebody to do some of your job that you don't like. It helps you hand that over much more quickly. And the time to start documenting, by the way, is now. Soon as you start doing a task, start creating the documentation for yourself. And then over time, you will produce this folder of stuff. Well, it will be a system online, a load of Word documents, no doubt, to start with. And we talked about this digital brain and this idea that all this technology is coming on board that's going to help you in the future. Really important that you document out these processes so you can pass that over to somebody else. And that will also help you reduce the overwhelming feeling as when you've got too many tasks to do, because you can create checklists. And bear in mind, things like doctors and airline pilots, very highly paid, they use checklists all the time. Not because they're stupid, it's because you don't have to overthink. You can just work through the checklist and it makes your life a lot easier. There's one other thing I really want to get onto before we run out of time, though, and that's kind of the mental health side of things, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a few years into running my business, I think I was about 2-3 years in, I had this client and they were very difficult to work with. And I now know they're a narcissist. At the time, I didn't have the skills to recognize this. They were their bullying personality, and I found that extremely challenging mentally. It was very debilitating, probably for about 6 months. I was very anxious and depressed, and I think it's important to realize that when you work for yourself, when you work for a company, you've got that framework around you. When you work for yourself, you don't necessarily have that framework. If anyone's got more questions about this, by the way, just ask me, or probably better to ask Matthew. But you don't have that support framework around you. So you need to find people that are like you, that are on the same path, that you can get support from, because it's a very lonely place sometimes, entrepreneurialism. And yeah, it was really tough. It was really tough for a little while there. And I I kind of regret not realizing that what the problem was sooner, but that is the naivety of starting your own business, and it comes with all those freedoms, but it also comes with that negative side, as it can emotionally affect you. And I mentioned earlier about working 80-hour weeks. You will get burnt out very quickly. Your body will start to tell you that you can't do that. You'll start to get weird mental, weird physical symptoms. Be going to the doctor and say, I don't know why, but like I get these pains in my legs or something. It's because you're pushing too hard. And it's very important that you recognize these things sooner than I did, and don't repeat that mistake as much as you can, and give yourself that free space. And you are your own boss. If you want to take the afternoon off, no one's telling you you can't. Don't be beholden, especially to narcissists and bullies. Don't if they're pushing you around, that's not a good customer. That's not the sort of person you want to be working with. It's just exhausting. It just drains your energy. And it's you have the great advantage is that you're not the boss, you are the boss, so you don't have to put up with these people in your life. If they're horrible customers, sack them, get other customers. Don't be beholden to them. And that it happens all the time. People say, oh, this customer, they never paid the bill on time, they're really difficult to work with, they're rude to me, rude to my team, shouting and screaming, swearing all the time. Eventually I tell them to do one, and I replace them the next day with a new customer who are paying twice as much or 10 times as much better. So yeah, you are in a position where sometimes you do need to put yourself first, and don't ever hesitate to do that. It's a really important thing to do, and recognize that as a neurodiverse person, you've already got challenges, especially like me, you were diagnosed late in life. You've already got challenges you don't really understand. You don't want to be adding to that pain if you can avoid it.
I think it's such important advice, and the fact that you do have that freedom to decide whether someone is the right person to work with or not. And I think it's a really important point that if it isn't a good fit, we just don't have to keep, you just end that relationship, that customer relationship. It
feels horrible, but you can just say, I'm really sorry, this isn't working, or I don't think we're a good fit for each other anymore, or could you find someone else, please? Goodbye.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
but obviously be professional, hand over everything you've done, and hopefully they'll pay you. But yeah, it's
and I think it's also, there's also a question of fit. One, like it's just they're not the right person for you, and this is and actually there's a lot of reasons again why having other people around you doing similar things is really, really useful. Because a lot of us, one way to say that we niche is to say that we take on difficult customers who are difficult in a specific way. It's just making sure that difficulty is the kind of difficulty that you like and you're good at sorting. And I've known people who could deal. Actually knew a project manager who was an expert at recovering like apparently irrecoverable projects. As a contractor, he just went in 6 months, like contract off the rails. He was put in at, even then, like this was 10 years ago, and he was at a big, like he was billed at like 1,500 a day. So he was billed at, and this wasn't in the commercial sector either. But his specialism was just taking this thing that had all gone wrong, and there was conflict and there was whatever, and getting it back on the rails. And so and that's what he was a specialist in. And so that understanding, is like one person's challenge is another person. So that's another reason to have a network, and have that relationship. And it also gives you that chance of, because when it's just you, and particularly if you're neurodivergent, or certainly for me, it's like I've been told I'm kind of wrong, or I'm wrong about this so often in a workplace context that's always my default assumption. I've misinterpreted them, or I'm like doing it wrong, or they're having someone you can run that by and go like, is this reasonable behavior? Is this a reasonable thing for a client to say to us? Is this a reasonable thing for the client to be upset about? And someone to turn around and say, no, don't be ridiculous. That's ridiculous, or I wouldn't put up with that. Gives you the wherewithal to
And
to
it's so easy to find these peer groups on social media, Facebook, Reddit. They're all out there. You can go and look at the other problems people have had. One thing I wanted to mention while you were talking about that is this idea of the whale client. So you need to be very careful with your client base that you're not reliant on. Well, there's the 80-20% rule as well. That probably like 20% of your profit is 80% of the clients, or 80% of the profit is 20% of the clients. So you always want to be reducing the really small ones, but at the same time as you don't want to be in a position where you're 30, 40, 60% reliant on one customer, because if they leave or the relationship goes bad, you're really stuck. So you always need to be looking to try and get a good mix of customers. I like personally to have not too many as well. That's another thing that people make the mistake of doing, is they go in really cheap, get loads and loads and loads of customers, and then can't manage them. So I think an ideal sole entrepreneur business, 5 customers would be perfect. 50 is a lot to manage. 200 is impossible. It's very difficult, and you can sell these low value items, but there's a lot of churn, and unless you're spending a lot of time on sales and marketing, and if you're technical, that's probably not the case. You're gonna struggle with that constant churn of customers, because there's 2 different types of customers, depending on your business. One's where you sell them one-off things, and one where you have repeat business. So with managed services, you've got repeat business. With other industries, you do one job and then you never see them again. So repeat business is nice, but doesn't always pay as well. So. Okay, so one last thing that we're talking about, which is we want to talk about perfectionism over preparation, and the idea of brain stop working now. Matthew, I remember when we get to that. One of the big problems I think that some neurodiverse people have been trained is that they can't do anything till it's perfect. And I think it's really important that you get this idea in your head of if you're building something, creating something, make it minimal viable product. So finish it. So imagine if you're building a bridge, you just need the bridge to go across the river. Building 90% of a bridge is useless. And then going, oh, this bridge isn't perfect, I'm going to tear it down and build it with stronger pillars, or I thought of a better way of it having better wind shear. Forget that. Get the bridge finished so it goes across the river. Then later on, you can do more. You can incrementally improve it. And that's often the handicap that people have, is they try and perfect stuff. They spend way too much time getting it perfect, trying to create a business plan that goes on for ages. Actually, I'm a big fan. There's two really good things that are on my notes are: create a 1 page for anything. So an A4 sheet of paper, and write down the thing that you want to do just on that bit of paper. So if you're creating a business plan, an A4 sheet of paper. If you're creating a proposal, no more than an A4 sheet of paper. And then the second thing that's really good is when you have a meeting with people about some work that you're going to do, summarize it quickly and send that back to them in an email. And we were talking earlier about legal stuff and getting yourself into legal issues. It saves a huge amount of hassle if you just summarize a meeting that you've had with someone, a discussion, send it back to them as an email. It doesn't work so well with narcissists, but with normal people, it means that you've got a record of what was agreed. So later on, they say, well, we didn't agree to that. It's like, well, that's not what it says in my notes. It's a real big pain time saver.
I think that's such a good tip for the importance of clarity as a neurodivergent person, particularly because I think when we're, when I'm talking to another ADHD person, I find it's very convenient. I actually don't have to say very much. We kind of get what the other person's talking about in quite a quick way. But if I'm talking to someone else, you get mutual mistakes. It's quite a lot of effort to make a shared understanding. So double checking that shared understanding with an email afterwards, or with something that's like where you've just got that check. Do we actually understand each other? Is this clear? Is a really helpful tip. So I think for me, it's that that bridging that understanding and being clear is a really important aspect.
And again, this is not something you're going to spend hours and hours doing, probably, unless it's a really super important meeting. It's just a numbered list of the item points that were discussed, and what conclusions were reached. That's all. And like, try to get rid of most of the spelling mistakes, but this is not a legal document. It's not a complicated proposal or something like that. It's just literally, this is what we discussed. So these are the main points that were agreed. That's all we're trying to get done. And we're trying to make it clear. So later on, if there's a disagreement, we understand where that arose, and hopefully you've covered off all the points. Always do that after every meeting. So after this meeting, I will share with all of you my notes from the meeting, and I'll add some more stuff, and hopefully you'll get all that in the group email. So if you want to refer back to it, it's not just floating in the back of your mind. That's the idea. But yeah, I think finally on the psychology stuff, then there's that rejection sensitivity and all this other emotional baggage that comes with neurodiversity. So I think it's very important, and like I didn't do with that narcissist woman I work with, it's very important that you recognize that maybe in the past you've had processes that I'm not a psychology expert by any means, but it's very important that you recognize that you've got built-in beliefs, processes, things you've learned in the past that may or may not serve you, and it's something you're going to have to look at a lot harder than if you're working in a job, because those challenges are going to keep coming up, and to the point you go, I need to fix this. And sometimes you do that yourself, sometimes you need to ask for help.
I think, and I want to take us to, one of the things we chatted about planning this is how you've addressed some of this, because it can sound very dry and it sounds very boring, but like you've done a lot of work on your communication skills in quite interesting ways. I think, like, particularly the comedy side of things, and like this doesn't have to be like, I think when you work for someone else, all of the oftentimes the training is very boring and the development is very boring. But one of the advantages of working for yourself is you can do, if you spot a need where you're like, oh, actually, I could improve that, you can do it in the most interesting way for you. And actually, so do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I met some people a couple of weeks ago I went to school with, so I haven't seen them in, last time I saw them was 1994. So you can work that out. Oh, yeah, 30 years. So a long time ago. And it was quite interesting because we talked about my difficulty like being neurodiverse at school because they didn't know. But also like, my personality is very different to how it was then. I've done a lot of work around social skills, communication skills, and that started probably when I was having my last job, and I did some work on NLP, and we're not going to talk too much about that, but that kind of taught me to like look out for how people communicated. And then a few years later, I've been asked to do more and more presentations. I did one for the local Chamber of Commerce, and it just wasn't very good. And then there's PowerPoint, and that's why I don't use PowerPoint. It's much more of a chatty conversation. I just find it's painful. It's a difficult tool to use well. And so from that, I went and joined a public speaking organization called Toastmasters, who are absolutely brilliant. They can be a bit clicky. I recommend you go and check out Toastmasters. That'll teach you two things. One is to stand in front of people and talk without having a panic attack. And they're very supportive. And the second thing is it will teach you how to focus your thoughts and then regurgitate them back to people in a language that makes sense to them. Then after doing that, I joined the Professional Speakers Association, and then I started doing stand-up comedy. Now, stand-up comedy is brilliant in terms of how you learn to become a better communicator. A lot of people on the open mic stand-up comedy scene are neurodiverse because they're on the same journey. They realize they need to get better at communication. They don't know how to do it. So they end up trying stand-up comedy because they like to stretch themselves. So you can try all of these things, but it's very interesting, this idea that by becoming better at stand-up comedy, I've become better at communicating, better at sharing the ideas that are in my head, better leader, better manager. And all of that stuff has been working towards how do I articulate things in a way so it makes sense to other people. And it can be very difficult. It's like it's a completely different language sometimes. And certainly when I'm trying to explain very technical stuff to management, I was speaking to this woman, she said, I started doing this talk for a load of lawyers, and they didn't know the difference. It transpired within the first 30 seconds between software and hardware, which made the talk absolutely impossible to deliver. So I had to rethink on my feet. And that's the problem, is if you're so far removed from where other people are in terms of your thoughts and how you're communicating, it's very difficult. There's a big barrier. It is like a completely different language. So anything you can do to learn how to close that gap is really valuable and will make you make more money, which is the purpose of running a business at the end of the day. It's not just to fill up your time doing bookkeeping and accounting.
Absolutely. I've got there's a couple of questions I wanted to go back to, but before I do, is there anything else you'd like to add to kind of wrap up this section?
We didn't talk about that Eisenhower matrix, did we? So we should probably mention about that very briefly. And again, it'll be in the notes. So if you're not familiar with this idea, we can split our work into importance and urgency. So everyone starts with the quadrant A, the urgent and important stuff. But actually, if you want to be successful, you can read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, waffles on about this, you want to work in quadrant B, which is those things that are not urgent but important. So when you're trying to develop your business, you'll put as much time as possible into those things that are not urgent but important. And then the things that are not urgent and not important, try not to do any of those things. And it's very hard to do that. It's very, very hard to do that. But the more time you spend planning and organizing and structuring, so you focus on those things that are not urgent but important, the more successful you will be. That's my top tip, really.
And those are often the things that kind of that grow, that contribute, that kind of grow over time, where you get compounding interest kind of on those things.
Yeah. And as I said earlier, you're not going to achieve something necessarily in an hour or a day or a week or a month, but over time, that's where the change will take place. I didn't learn to stand in front of people with no preparation and do improv overnight. It took lots of skill development. And now my brain isn't going a million miles an hour. I can have a conversation that I've just thought of. And it wasn't possible to do that 15 years ago.
Absolutely. No, super. Well, thank you very much. I do want to just go through a couple of quick questions. So the first one is from Lee, and is being a specialist the same thing as being an expert? I find it always leaning more even. I tend to be specializing in the moment, so don't always consider myself an expert. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So you are the expert or the specialist if you know anything more than the other people. That's the interesting thing about it. Like, people will pay for your expertise because you are a shortcut to getting things done. Like, I'm not an expert in accountancy, but I can read balance sheets and profit and loss. So if you can't do those things, then I'm an expert. But clearly I'm not compared to somebody else. So there's different levels of expertise, and you just need to be a little bit better than the person who's paying you. Yeah. You don't need to know everything. You're not trying to be a university professor where you're trying to learn absolutely everything there is about the thing necessarily. You just need to be a little bit better than the person you're working for, so you can guide them. Or have you done that journey before?
And available, it's that thing of like good enough, close, available, and like it's to hand, the person to hand. But the other side of this is, and I mentioned before, is the importance of fit and the importance of niche. Is you don't have to be the best expert in. We'll say say let's take us technical skill. Say you help people with, I don't know, Office 365, with Office 365 implementations. Is you don't have to know, you be the best to serve a customer if you know enough about Office 365, but you also understand the kind of business that they operate, versus knowing every single thing about Office 365, but not understanding what they're trying to do with it. Well, yeah, which is, yeah.
Well, recently I did some job as an expert on an HP SAN, storage attached box. And the reason that I was the expert is because I was a lot older than the other people that were in the team that were working on this job. And they wanted somebody that had more experience. That was it. That was my experience that I brought to the table. That wasn't a skill experience. That was a knowledge of being more experienced. So you don't necessarily need to be focusing on I need to know absolutely everything about this thing before you start. And that's why I was saying about this whole procrastination thing is you can just start now, and you can run it alongside your day job. You don't need to just there's so many options, so many different ways of doing it. And I strongly recommend that you do that if possible, is run it alongside what you're doing at the moment.
Yes, I think that that's great advice. That kind of neat, if you can do it, a kind of, neat dovetail thing going on where you do a little bit on the side, and then if you can, if you are in a day job at the moment, um, a lot of people I know have gone to like 3 or 4 days a week once things started to take off, and then they've gone into a functioning business already, so they've already got the clients, and they're just building something that works. There's a
Because
lot to be said also for just trying things out in a day job as much as you can, because we both said you're going to make mistakes. Making mistakes is part of it, but if you can get someone else to pay for making those mistakes, then you've learned from there, and that's valuable too.
yeah, it's absolutely that. If you can, someone else will pay for your mistakes. That's great.
Yep.
Because and then you've got the whole sunk costs as well. That once you've spent ages doing something, it's like, how long do I persevere with it if it's not working? It's trying different things to figure out, like, create those minimum viable products and trying them and just making sure that you're on the right path. And most entrepreneurs I know, they've tried loads of different things, certainly more than a handful, until they hit on the right market. So, like, for example, my brother, he did some IT support for a bit, then he went and did websites for estate agents, and he now does websites for motorsports because his passion is motorsports. And let's face it, motorsports are lots more exciting than estate agents. So
Yes, but also needing a lot more kind of technical knowledge on some level. There's going to be
but
there's
because
a
he specializes in that
it's that
area,
niching. Yeah,
like, people come to him because he's the obvious specialist. And
yeah.
all he said is that I specialize in motorsport rather than I do web design. And that's the difference. I do web design for people with the motorsports industry, or I do web design. And that's really narrowing your market down. It makes it, you can charge a lot more for the same stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I've had an interesting comment from Dav here. So he said, I work closely with other people in teams using pair programming and mobbing, but this has become much more difficult after COVID. I'm good at this and good at helping people with that skill set, but not sure how to use that best that now that so many people want to work remotely.
I'm not sure what those things are. Sorry, Matthew.
So pair programming is when you both you kind of it's not actually something I've done either, but when you both program, I believe when one of you is programming, you kind of talk out loud and you work in the same space. It's part of this set of kind of agile development
Okay.
practices. And mobbing is groups of people working on the same problem in the same space.
Okay.
So
So,
I
so
so it's a skill set that I think they're good at and that they want to use more of, but are struggling to get out there.
Okay, so there's so first of all, let's look at the kind of practicalities at it. There's apps online you can use to collaboratively work with people, whether together or just in the same space. And there's co-working space where you can go to and work surrounded by other people. So if you want that kind of environment, I personally like it nice and quiet. So, but if you want that kind of work environment and you thrive where there's people around, that co-working space can be really good, as can using those apps, so you're not just on your own. In terms of collaborative working and developing a team together, you can do that, but one thing to consider is, remember I mentioned all those areas of sales, marketing, finance. If everybody that starts a business has the same skill set, you're going to have to recruit those other people in. It's going to be hard to find those people. So I'm sure you can find contract work delivering that for a corporate, that is going in and being a team leader for dev stuff.
Yeah,
I,
I
I
think
yeah.
I would say there's a couple of things
Mm.
for me similarly, but yes, again, there's a niche there. There's going to be people that still want to work in person or that are required, where the job requires working in person. Thinking about jobs with security clearance, for example. So if that's an attractive thing for you, then there's going to be spaces where those skills are still relevant. And just like you said, Dave, the other side of it is actually, well, how can you you can innovate a bit. You can develop something that has all of these advantages and is remote or partly remote, maybe. It works some of the time, or is, so you can blend it. And that innovation stuff is going to be a lot more trial and error, but is likely to result in a product that no one else has, an offer that no one else has. So if you can solve a problem that other people haven't solved, then you have a genuinely innovative product. I don't want to go too much down that line, because that could be a whole nother presentation.
Two things quickly spring to mind about this. I closed my office about a decade ago because I realized it was pointless, but I didn't tell anyone. I just let it carry on. I got a message on I got a message on Google My Business that said, "I'm outside your office," but I didn't spot it for 3 months, so I hope they're not still there. And the second thing is that you can, another business, as I mentioned right at the beginning, you can collaborate with people on projects, so you don't have to create a formal structure to do this. You can work together with a team of people to develop a product or service on a fairly informal basis. And there's apps and tools out there that help you work that process through. And I'd certainly recommend investigating that. And certainly, I know a lot of developers, they're part of these kind of incubator, like they mostly seem to be the ones I've seen mostly about working around co-working space, where they're trying to get people to come together to develop some ideas that may or may not work. However, unfunded startups is a great way of just burning through lots and lots of energy and time. So you really need somebody who has done it and successfully made something that works. Everyone I know that works kind of these startups, half of them don't do anything, don't work, and about 80% don't make any real money, and then maybe 20% do. So you're gonna have to do a lot of iterations, and if you're not being paid in a job, that can get quite expensive. So just bear that in mind. That it's great to, ideas are free, everyone can come up with lots of ideas, but making them work, getting them over the line, that's an expensive undertaking in terms of time and money.
It's all about testing as quickly and cheaply as possible.
Yeah, which is why I said get the bridge finished. Get the bridge finished, like you said, make it work. Microsoft are really good at this. Make the software so it works. Doesn't matter if it's riddled with bugs. And then once people start using it, then you can fix all the other stuff afterwards, because it's bringing in money.
Yep, absolutely. So does anyone have any other questions before we wrap up? Super. Seems very good. I can't see any more coming in. Thank you all very, very much for attending. Dave, did you want to share the link in the chat just now, or shall I do that? Is that?
I can. No, you can do. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. I will. It is a living document, so I may add and change it, and I've got some notes of stuff I'll add. So you might want to give me 24 hours and have a look at it. My email address is there, so if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Not a problem.
Super, and lots of thanks in the chat. So yeah, thank you very much, Dave, for everything you've shared. And
I'll try and help anyone that does reach out to me as much as I can, but time permitting.
Yeah,
no screaming children today, so that's good.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, so yes, and I hope this has been useful. If this has been useful to you, it's really good for us to know. We're focusing on different things and exploring what to do within the NeurodiverseIT group. So if this is particularly useful as a focus, then please do let us know. The video recording will be available probably in a couple of weeks. It usually takes that long. So if there's anything you want to go back to or want to check, then there's also that. We don't have anything scheduled immediately in the calendar organized by this specialist group, but we will be doing some more stuff, particularly around co-creation and sharing some of the knowledge in the wider community, and building some stuff and supporting BCS in doing that, as well as focusing on this innovation and entrepreneurship. So thank you very much, Dave, for your time. Thank you, everyone, for your comments and your questions and your kind words. And I hope to see you at another event very soon.